Okay, good.
So, the last several weeks, we've been exploring questions on life. We've been exploring questions on God and our relationship with the things that God does within the universe. And we began this journey in hopes that you would see God in a different light. That you would not see God as this ominous being that is judgmental and vindictive, an unconcerned God, but rather that you would see God as a loving God, a merciful God, a God of kindness that is a lover of the human soul. Because you see, I think we've all heard descriptions about God in our lifetime. If you've been to church, you know what people say about God. But it's so interesting to me how we can have certain descriptions about who God is, yet our relationships not match the kind of descriptions that we have for God. When we say God is a loving God, but all of our relationships are broken because we cannot love other people. When we say God is a loving, forgiving God, but we will refuse to enter into new relationships in our lives because we've been hurt before. And so we say, like, we've heard who God is, but our lives don't match the description of God. They kind of just match the description of pain and of trauma and of this feeling of a distraught past and hopelessness. See, I've heard so many people say that God is full of hope. Like, Jesus is full of hope, but they are some of the most hopeless people I've ever met in my life. Have you ever met anybody that just is negative about everything? Like, some of the most negative people I've found in my life are people that are Christian, and I don't know where this comes from. I don't know how you could say that God is full of hope, that Jesus inspires us, moves us, has changed culture and art and just life in general, and we are some of the most hopeless people on the planet. And so it's something different to say that God is hopeful and I'm a follower of Jesus, and then live a life of bitterness and of resentment. And so a lot of us, we've heard all these different of descriptions, these differences of opinion describing God and who he says he is. But there's a difference between hearing what other people have said about God and it being true to our lives. See, this is a childish example. And I'll just tell you a story. There was this coffee shop that I absolutely love called Blue Bottle. And when I went to Chicago, my God, dude, like, I fell in love with the restaurant. The coffee was delicious. I was a Blue Bottle follower. And so when I went to, LA with some of the team here, I was like, we gotta go try Blue Bottle. We gotta go try Blue Bottle. Blue Bottle will change your life. It's so good. And then we showed up to that Blue Bottle, and it smelled like an orphan had taken a dump on the stairs. It was a disgusting smell, and the coffee didn't taste like coffee. It tasted like water that was rinsed in somebody's mouth and poured back into a cup. We're going to be very visual today. It was absolutely disgusting. And I was so disappointed because the experience I had with Blue Bottle in a different place with a different culture, which made me assume that all the Blue Bottles and all the other cultures had the same intentionality behind what they create. And then quickly I realized, man, this is actually kind of like what it is to be a follower of Jesus in different spaces, where different people say that God is full of love, but in some places, the people are just full of judgment, full of gripe, full of negativity. I've done something in my life. I've tried to combat negative things with positive things. When somebody says something negative, I try to say something positive, right? And if somebody's really negative, I'm really positive. Oh my God, you're so annoying. It's like, you're annoying, stop! Beep. He laughed. The baby laughed. Yes, oh yeah, dude. Oh, dude, yeah. Good night, everybody. All right, let's go home, yeah. But that's the same thing with God. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but in this whole theme that we've carried for 5 weeks, we've been speaking with this undertone and exploring questions that have a theme of relationships. Because the one thing that we struggle with the most in our lives, it seems to be like relationships. We seem to struggle with relating to each other, relating to nature, relating to God, relating to ourselves. I don't know if you've ever looked at yourself in the mirror and been like, I don't feel like myself. How is it that you can't feel like who you are, except that there's something deep inside of us? Something that God wants to turn into something beautiful, something that keeps us from entering into a connection, into a relationship with God and the people around us. And what I've learned is that what reveals your beliefs is when you are in contrast to other people. What reveals what you believe, what reveals what you think to be true, is revealed by how you relate to others. That's why I love Kathleen. I love watching Kathleen in the contrast of other people. Because when Kathleen is in a room with other people, everybody is so happy. Even if Kathleen just had the worst day of his life, he makes people extremely happy. And I've had the incredible pleasure of seeing him grow up and been really close to him. And absolutely, Kathleen is one of those people that you want at your wedding. And if he's late to your wedding, you forgive him because he's just that nice. And by the way, that happened to me. And 2 hours late, but he's a nice guy, right? But in contrast to other people, Kathleen just shines. Every single time, for as long as I've known him, even in middle school when he had a rat tail for hair, he would step into situations and just make people smile, make people feel so good about himself. And what I realized is that to know the state of what you believe, to know the state of who you are, is really seen in contrast of other people. When you are in a space of emergency, a space that is difficult, who you are in that moment in contrast to others shows what you believe. And Kathleen is one of those people that believes the best in people. It's so true that the other day I ran into somebody at Walmart, a mom of one of our friends, and we were just talking, and Kathleen came up, because Kathleen comes up in everybody's conversations. Whether it's something positive or negative, he comes up. But still somehow the negative things about him are positive. And I was talking to this mom, and she was even being so sincere. And she's like, oh, I absolutely love Kathleen. Everybody loves Kathleen. Everybody's mom loves Kathleen. He's so sweet and sincere. Honestly, he's one of my, no, you know what? He's my favorite of my son's friends. It's very nice. The problem is I'm also one of her son's friends. So I'm not bitter. I'm just hurt. And I stood there like, Got any other? No, right. Just Kathleen. But this is what I love about Jesus. What I think is also so beautiful about him is that we get to see who God is in contrast to us. That in order to understand God, we don't need to exclude him or separate him from humanity. What he chose to do was step into a human story to show us who he really is. And I love Jesus because Jesus, while being God, spoke to the people that were the least of that society. If God would have only chosen to speak to people of opulence, of great fame, if God would have only chosen to speak with people of high regard, we would have never seen an aspect of God that is beautiful and true. An aspect of God that looks like him stepping down to us. No matter the color, no matter the creed, no matter who we are. I love to imagine what it must have felt like to see Jesus. See, I think that in that time, I would have been not a person of importance or significance. I think I would have been considered the least of the scene. I can just imagine Jesus with his kindness, just caressing my face and staring into my soul and just giving me so much hope. See, God stepping into the human story, like the beauty of Jesus, the beauty of God, is that he would take time, split time in half, and step into our story just to show us how much he loves us. And there's a moment in John, chapter 9, verse 1, that is this moment. It's been very emotional for me, this verse. In John chapter 9, verse 1 through 7, it reads this. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus said. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him. Wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home, seeing. See, I think this is such an ideal moment for us to step into. An ideal moment for us in our journey to understand who God is in ourselves. We need to make a stop here and focus in this moment, because there is an insight in here that would be overlooked if you don't look closely. An insight in here that allows us to see some of the human misconceptions of the world. A misconception that we have is that in order for God to create something beautiful, he needs to have beautiful material. Because after all, in order for us to create something beautiful, we need beautiful material. I work on an artisan's guild, and there is an artisan there who has been a master craftsman for 40 years. He is one of a kind, as rare as they are, a sage, a wizard when it comes to creating things. And he knows how to bend wood, carve it. He makes beautiful artistic pieces that sell for millions of dollars. And he uses the rarest of woods to create chairs. This is actually one of his pieces that I painted white. And that a kid came over here with Cheeto fingers and put their imprint on for this. Oh, it's all good. It's not like it was like $30,000 that I didn't pay for. But he creates amazing things. This right here that doesn't look like your traditional pulpit is actually a stand for art. And the stand can't cost more than the art, because this is a specific wood that can only be cut after 100 years of life. This is one of the most indestructible wood, the most dense wood that is almost equivalent to steel and only found in Africa. He uses the most beautiful, detailed materials to create beautiful things. And people pay top dollar, and in my case, he was just generous and gave me this. But somehow, intrinsically, we know that in order to create beautiful things, we need to use beautiful materials. Which is what I love so much about Jesus. Is that he takes things that we consider hideous. Jesus takes things that we consider broken or useless or meaningless, unwanted, and he creates the most beautiful works from the most broken of materials. And this is the kind of moment we find here. See, it says, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. I want to make a note here. Jesus never walked aimlessly. I love John. Man, I swear he would have been one of my greatest friends, because he loves to just romanticize everything. Well, everybody started the story of Jesus at his birth. John was like, no, in the beginning, like in eternity. And so John just describes this as if Jesus was just walking around, but I want to let you know that anywhere that Jesus would step into was an appointment, was a mission. And it's crucial that John notes that Jesus is the one that begins what's about to happen here. It's Jesus who sees the blind man. It's Jesus who engages. And I have a slight suspicion that this blind man was invisible to people. I have a slight suspicion that this man was incidental, that everyone was walking, but nobody saw the blind man because he was considered the filth of the earth. He was considered an abomination, but Jesus is the one who engages him. Jesus is the one who breaks the rules and sees the blind man in a crowd full of people. And verse 2 says, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, which means teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's important to note that this was a blind man, not a deaf man. Teacher, who sinned? Why is he born without sight? Is it because of his parents or is it because of him? Can you imagine hearing the commotion of the crowd with rumors that Jesus is amongst them, hopelessly wanting to be seen, hopelessly wanting to make a life? See, if you were blind back then, you didn't make an income. You lived by the generosity or the guilt of other people in that society. Could you imagine how angst he must have been? That the Savior of the world, that the Messiah, that the Christ to come, that the champion of the people was amongst the crowd and coming towards you. Could you imagine, as an impaired blind man or woman, hearing that Jesus, even though they're not sure if he's the Messiah, has particular gifts, that when he touches people, they are healed, that when he speaks, the paralytic walk, that when he touches lepers, they are healed? You would be excused to think that perhaps this man heard that Jesus was coming and hoping for the life of him, that Jesus was coming for him. And here he is blind, not able to see anything, just hearing a loud crowd saying, Jesus is here. Jesus is amongst us. But instead, what the disciples do when Jesus notices him is they begin to have a philosophical and theological conversation about this man's blindness. Instead of being prompted to meet the man's need, they become to have a conversation about God. Can you believe the utter lack of empathy, the utter lack of compassion? And they would see the blind man and Jesus notices him, and instead of asking Jesus to do a miracle in him, they use him as a lesson, an object to expand their capacity, a conversational piece to know whether sin was in his life or the life of his parents. Could you imagine how embarrassing that must have been for that man? I know you've got sight, but imagine for a second if you were to close your eyes and you've been blind all your life and you believe that Jesus is walking through. You would think that his disciples would have the same heart as him, but instead he becomes an object, a lesson. And they said, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? What a heartbreaking view of the world. What a terrible view of God. To think that God would punish a man for his sins and the sins of his parents, that his physical embodiment, that his impairment was because God was rejecting him. Could you imagine the utter shame and guilt that that man must have felt? And you have to understand something, that in their world, they believed that if you were born paralytic, if you were born with epilepsy, God, if you had stress, you had a demon in you. They believed that if you were unable to walk, that you had sin. That if you were born as a leper, if you were born as a deaf man, then that was proof of God's judgment in your life. In that world, they believed that God would punish somebody before anyone could do anything. Just that he predetermined them, destined them to have a life of suffering. So in their world, it was a proof that they were born under judgment. They were born under the judgment of God if they were paralytic or sick. And this philosophy, this theology, it's mind-boggling, because even if it wasn't the consequences of him, they assume it must have been the consequences of their parents. But no matter what, the consequences of sin somewhere is the reason why this man is suffering. So the disciples say, we know why he's blind, Jesus. It's sin. We know why this person got cancer. It's sin. We know why this person did not want to live anymore. Because it's sin. And there's so many people in the same sphere that we are in who hold onto this belief that the reason why their body, the reason why they're sick, the reason why they are hopeless is because they sinned or their parents sinned. So they ask him, who is it to blame, Jesus? Who is it to blame? This man or his parents? Now, I'm guilty for a lot of things. I'm trying to be healthy now, I'm working out, I gained some weight. Dude, I'm like obsessed with working out, except I haven't worked out in a week, so. But I'm guilty for some things while in the process of trying to become healthier. I've been sneaking some ice cream in there, eating a little bit of cake here and there, some chocolate, drinking a lot of soda. I can't say no to Chick-fil-A. I don't know what. You heard her laugh, right? She's related to Chick-fil-A, that's why. So I'm guilty of things that are petty, that are small, but I'm also guilty of really big mess-ups. See, I've done a lot of wrong things. I'm not up here because somehow I walked the holy life, the life that Jesus wanted me to live since I was 3, born and just sanctified by the Holy Spirit, predestined to speak life over you. I am one of the most guilty people in the building for making terrible decisions that have had huge consequences in my life. Have you ever had consequences of bad choices in your life? Have you ever made a really poor decision and it cost you a lot? I've made poor decisions that have cost me my family. I've made poor decisions that are too many to go down this line of poor decisions. But all of us, we are guilty of things, and I've had to live with the consequences of my mistakes. And sometimes I've made bad decisions and become a better person. Have you done that? Have you changed? Have you done something horrible, but then you changed? And the consequences still were there for the wrong things that you did? Still haunting you down like a hungry lion. And you go, well, I changed, but the consequences don't care who you are. They only care about who you were. And so I think we're all guilty, and we can all assume that because of our mistakes, there are consequences to our mistakes. But could you imagine living in a world where you're living out the consequences of your mistakes, but before you're born, you are already punished for the mistakes that you're going to commit? Could you imagine receiving the consequences of your mistakes the moment you were born? This was their mindset. This was their frame of understanding about who God was. That even before you committed a sin, that the consequences of your sin were impairments. What a cruel world to live in. What a terrible God. What a terrible theology. And I can't believe that those people still exist today. I said it. Zoom in. It makes me so frustrated when people use manipulation. So frustrated that people use the tactics of the Pharisees today and try to teach people a bad theology, really so that they can put them inside cults and chain them to humans. I need to come down real quick. I'm very mad about that. So could you imagine that? That's horrible. It's like being born with debt before you use the credit card. It's like, God, I'm full of debt. I was just born. Could you imagine that conversation? And this was their belief. Well, you're going to spend money on that credit card, so might as well just charge you now for the rest of your life. for the one moment that you will make the mistake of buying something you can't afford. Verse 2, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? Teacher, who sinned, this man? See, the only way that he could be born blind is if God was punishing for the sins that he was going to commit in his adulthood. The only way that he could be born blind is if this world, this concept was a messed up world, a messed up God, an unjust God. And if God was actually like this, then he would not be worthy of our worship. He would not be worthy of our trust. He would not be worthy of our praise, our finances. He would not be worthy of our lives. And this is their view. Is he blind because of his sins? That's the best case scenario. Is he blind because he did something wrong? Or is he blind because of the sins of his parents? Now, it's like, what? If it's not that I did something wrong, it's that my parents did something wrong. It's that my parents sinned. Hey, newsflash, everybody. We all sin. So this theology means that if anyone approximate to you sins and you are born with an impairment, it is proof that there is sin in your life. It's like wearing a tag on your shirt that says, I am a sinner, will never enter heaven, and God does not love me. A perfect strategy to manipulate and change who God is. Now, sociology teaches us that there's an odd relationship between parents and children. That in a strange way, parents who are alcoholics seem to pass on to other children alcoholism. That alcoholics birth alcoholics, and alcoholics birth alcoholics. That rage births rage, births rage, births rage. The manipulation births manipulation, manipulation. That aggression births aggression, aggression, and more aggression. And so we know that there is this phenomenon called the sins of the father, the sins of the parents. But this is not what they're talking about in this moment. And some of you, you know what it feels like to feel like there's been a darkness passed down onto you. That it feels like you didn't choose, but that it chose you. A darkness that haunts you, that you never asked for, but almost seemed like it was inherited to you because of your parents. And so you can feel haunted for the rest of your life because you think that the reason why you are suffering, the reason why you share these quote-unquote sins is because your parents have passed them down to you. But in sociology, this isn't sin. This is behavior. So this is not what they're talking about. Oh, and by the way, if you're a person that's lived your life blaming other people for the state of your life, you will never be able to see the beauty of what God can do in yours. Because you will only be held by blame and shame. Because you will spend the rest of your life blaming your parents, blaming your dad, blaming your mom for a life that you've always had the choice to choose on your own. God will not use you in a beautiful way if you don't turn your blame into an opportunity to forgive. So this isn't what they're talking about. They're not talking about a sociological phenomenon. They're talking about sin. They're talking about something deeper, something spiritual. So in verse 2 it says, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? What they're actually asking Jesus is, did God punish him for the sins he committed, or is God punishing him for the sins of his parents? And it's like, I have enough sins for myself that I need to pay for. Now you're going to tell me that I've got sins that I need to pay for in my parents? Now, I'll be honest with you. This might surprise you. I had really good parents. I know, that's weird, right? Like, what? Good parents? What are those? I had good parents. And despite all the difficulties that they went through, they stayed together. Despite us being broke, they fought for us. They taught us love and kindness and generosity in a way that nobody else has ever taught me in my life. I was very fortunate to have incredible parents. And I know some of you come from broken homes and you're like, I can't imagine a healthy family. I hope to be that healthy family in the future. But I'll let you know something, whether it's a healthy family or not, our parents sin. And there have been moments in my life where my parents have made mistakes that have cost me something. Sins of my parents that I have dealt with the consequences of. But I grew up in a great family. And sometimes when our past is really dark and our parents have expressed deep and horrifying sins in our lives, we felt marked and tagged like that's everything that we're ever going to amount to. Have you ever felt like that? Did you ever grow up in an environment like that? But could you imagine the followers of Jesus who have seen compassion, who have seen love, see this blind man who is in need, and at their first point of contact, ask Jesus, did his parents make a mistake? And is he paying for their mistake, or is he paying for his own? Could you imagine if for the rest of your life you were paying for the mistakes of your dad? The mistakes of your mom? I mean, what is this theology? What is this thought about the universe and of God? And the disciples who have met God, who are followers of Jesus, are the ones coming to this conclusion. The ones that are supposed to hold the flag of love. The ones that are supposed to hold the flag of hope. They're saying you're only going to go as far as the sin of your past or the sin you're going to commit. Does that not make you angry? Does that not make you enraged? Like, that is so not right. What kind of God is this? But all they could do is think of who they could blame. I don't know every bit of your story, but I know that blame will get you nowhere. Look, some of us have had tragedy in our childhoods. I know we all have really difficult moments. But blame will get you nowhere. If you want to create a future for your family that is of hope, that is of love, you need to turn that blame and let God use that material to turn into something beautiful, like grace, like love, like hope, that He would do something different in your family. We have made mistakes in our life. But the mistakes that we have made, we need to accept responsibility. I need about 15 more. We're only halfway there. I think now you understand why I cried, like, preparing for this. Because I've never been blind before. So, trying to set myself in this moment, I tried to not see and just imagine what it would feel like. And just imagine being abandoned. See, he's without a family. There's no one there with him. Because if a parent has a child that is impaired, they would throw them into the street. What a tragic world to live in. Oh, by the way, they use the word sin here. Now, if you open up the scriptures, you will see the word sin everywhere. And it applies to you. And it applies to me. That sin is this condition, is this thing that divides us from who God is. See, and the reason that a lot of people don't talk about sin outside of a space of faith is because we don't really think of ourselves in a divine aspect, with a divine design. What sin is a separation that is created from who you were created to be and who you are. What sin does is that it creates a barrier, a wall between the life that God wants for you and the life that you are living. And I want to do good in the world. I want to do a lot of good things in this world. I want to help people, but there's something inside of me. There's something that is a force that I think is just me, but that is like an upsetting stomach that is called sin. that even when I want to do good things, sometimes I succumb to it. I let that talk me into doing things that separate me from my design. And I'm trying to understand, God, like, how can I sin less? But it's so difficult to even understand myself. I've been with Kara for over 8 years. And I've known a lot of people, probably 100 people, maybe a little bit more than that. And I'm not trying to figure out everybody. I'm just trying to figure out Kara. And after 8 years, I still can't guess what she wants to eat tomorrow. After 8 years, I still have to ask her, hey, what do you want to eat? I don't know. Oh. Which, by the way, is get me something I would regularly eat, right? Except that when you suggest it, he's married, he knows what I'm talking about. Except that when you suggest it, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know. There was this time where I knew what she wanted, but she wanted to be financially responsible. What the frick? Imagine that. Imagine doing that. Imagine buying food you can afford. Chick-fil-A again. So, I was like, you want some of God's chicken? I didn't say it like that, but you know. And she was like, oh yeah, I kind of want to be healthy. We went through this whole roadmap, this whole game of Candyland to find what she wanted to eat, just to end up at we should get Chick-fil-A. I wanted to die. I have a hard time understanding her, and I've known her more than most of you. And kind of like that is what's inside of us. We live with ourselves, but there is sin inside of us that we can't quite quantify. Sometimes we want to do good things, but it just overcomes us. It just makes us succumb to a life that is lower than the life that God has expected us and designed us for. And when we live outside of our intention, live outside of our original design, we create a separation between who we are and who we're meant to be. Because there's something broken inside of us. There's something inside of us that we need to fight against, to struggle with. And I kept trying to figure out why they were blaming somebody, why the disciples were trying to look for blame. And I need you to understand this if you're going to take anything home with you today. Is please understand this, that when the Bible talks about sin, it's not there to give blame. When the Bible talks about sin, it's there to give healing. That sin is not condemnation. Sin is a diagnosis. And we all struggle with sin, but just because you have sin in you, it doesn't mean that your whole life needs to be amounted to sin. Just because you do things that are wrong, it doesn't mean that the life you need to live for needs to be under the mindset of I am evil. Just because there are forces working within you, it does not mean that that's who you are, that's what you're diagnosed with. And when the scriptures talk about sin, it's not about judgment, it's not about indictment, it's about an opportunity to have healing in our broken lives. And you would think that the church would change their mindset with Jesus' response. But somehow we've still created an institution that tells people that they will amount to nothing but evil, that they will amount to nothing but sin, that they are worthless. Yet we preach that God would give everything he is for you because he values you that much. What happened in our story as a space of faith that we began to say that sin is an indictment, not an opportunity for God to change our lives? You would think that Jesus' response here, neither would give the church a reason to hope. Yet sometimes the people who have the least amount of hope for the world are the Christians. Because they read the end of the book, which they don't understand because they can't interpret dreams, and say, we're all doomed, we're all going to hell. Give your life to Jesus so you don't go to hell. And then we wonder why we create a religion that just wants to improve character and not know Jesus at all. Then we wonder why we have a church full of robots and not of individuals. Because if I can get into heaven, I'm good. Hey, it's not about you getting into heaven. It's about you meeting heaven. Yes, sir. I got one. Everybody's kind of hurt today. It's like, yo, you're kind of talking about me, right? It's like, I'm talking about the blind man. You're talking about me? I love couples because when there's something being said on the stage, right, and there's other person who knows you there, right, they kind of look at you like, I didn't tell him anything, I swear. It's like, no, this is just the human condition. Ooh, we're going to be here for a little longer. Sorry, we have to be. All right, let's do it. Chapter 9, verse 2, verse 3 says, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. I love how people give him two options. I've met so many people that ask me this question, yes or no, A or B. And I go, C. Is it this or is it that? No. And Jesus here is like giving only two, like those kind of people that ask you questions, but really they're telling you something. Oh. We got one. And here they are, it's Jesus. It's got to be either A or B, but Jesus says, no, with me there's always a third answer. No, you don't understand. I know you think there's only two ways to everything. And Jesus says there is not two ways for everything except for voting for president. All right, moving on. I'm having a lot of restraint this morning. Oh, no, God is going to, on the playback, I'm going to be like, why did you say that? And Jesus says, no, there's a third option. I see, we imagine God in so many different ways. If you're somebody who takes everything in the scriptures literal, that's great, man. Your life is going to be great. All good, bro. There's some things you might have to research a little deeper, but that's okay. Know Jesus. That's the most important part. And there's some of you who see poetry and the beauty of what God is telling us. And the beautiful thing about the scriptures is that the truth of God on earth is enough to save us and change our soul. I absolutely love that. And sometimes we come up with a theology that says it's either this or either that. And I don't know why, but hopefully in the future, we start having people that are vocal in our space that say, hey, man, perhaps we don't have the answer. Perhaps we have an idea and God does something completely different than what we're imagining. There are so many discussions, so many wars that happen because people disagree on these kinds of points. And I love what Jesus says here. Hey, maybe it's neither. Maybe the most important part is that you don't try to figure out the laws of the universe, but figure out how I feel about you. Let's start there. Verse 3. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. They are focusing on who's to blame. But Jesus is moving them to say, blame gets you nowhere. And I want you to realize that what they saw as the problem is actually potential. As what they saw as a man that was blind, Jesus saw as a man who could see. See, they had been taught that the sins of this man's blindness, that the sins were the proof that this man was blind, that God had abandoned him, that God had rejected him, that God would never use him. And Jesus was saying, you need to change your perspective on this. You need to see the beautiful things that God wants to do, because you think that this is proof that God is not with him, but actually this is proof that God is going to meet him. You need to realize that God doesn't work around the mess. He works through it. Does not work around your mess. He works through you. Stop trying to blame someone else, to be left with guilt and shame, even if it's self-blame, and start living, understanding that you don't have to be perfect, that you don't even have to be clean to come to God, that even as a mess, God could create a beautiful work of art. His disciples asked Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. And in this moment, this right here is the moment where a lot of people would say, see, God made this man blind. But that's not at all what Jesus is saying. Jesus is not saying, I made this guy blind so that I could work through him. What Jesus is telling us is that God is not incapable of taking our most tragic condition, the most tragic circumstance, and creating something extraordinary and beautiful in our lives. God will take the pain of your past, the things you have inherited, the things that are hideous, the things that you do not think should define you, and he will use those things and craft your life into a beautiful life worth living. This man's blindness is where God is going to meet him. Your pain is where God's going to meet you. And God is allowing the story to play out so that this could be the story of God. Your story will never be the story of God if you don't allow him to take your pain and your trauma and step into it. Because that's what he does. He turns your tragic story and turns it into a story of hope. And I love what John writes here again. John, I hope when we meet in heaven, you'll dab me up, because this is fire. He says, so the works of God may be displayed in him. He says this piece, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on his eyes. Now this is very strange. You know how we're like, we got to be like Jesus. This is one of those moments where if you were there and you were seeing Jesus do that, you'd be like, oh, Jesus, what would Jesus do? And Jesus is like, I think I would do that, you know? It's so strange to me that this would be Jesus' tactic. Have you ever wondered? Spitting on the ground, and man, if I was blind, but a kid, I could hear, I would be like, hey, guys, what's that spitting? Oh, that's Jesus. Why is he spitting so close to me? Sorry, buddy. You know, I would be like, hey, I know I can't see, but get your spit out of my way. That's disgusting. Jesus, come on. Can you do some fairy dust or something? Please, Jesus. Does you brush your teeth? It's like, no, they didn't brush your teeth back then. Oh, my God. Oh. Jesus, why would you do this? And it's like, this is so humiliating. And this is what other people take in the scripture. How could Jesus humiliate? I've been so humiliated so many times in my life in front of hundreds of people. They said really dumb things. I remember one of the first times that I started singing in youth group. Unfortunately, I was a teenager. And my voice cracked, not while I was singing, but as soon as I opened my mouth. Like, people were there like, great, we're getting a rooster for worship today. I've been humiliated so many times. I could just imagine being blind, a crowd of hundreds of people, Jesus engaging me, people making fun of me, making assumptions about my life, and Jesus' response is to spit on the ground and make mud to cover it on my face. Spit smells. I know you don't know that, but you do when you spit in your hand. Disgusting. It's one of the most foul things. And sometimes I wonder how theologians got their degree. No disrespect. Because I read some theologians trying to describe this situation. Why Jesus spat? They said, well, it wasn't any ordinary spit. It was divine spittle. I don't want your spit. Divine or not, Jesus. See, I've never heard of the scripture say that God, the God of the universe, spit the universe into existence. I mean, if he could talk and heal somebody, talk. Jesus, touch me, I don't know. Spit. And see, Lord is trying to come up with these stupid things. If you say in a British accent, you'll get away with it. Or if you're really, really old. Oh, he's really, really old. He's been a theologian for 50 years. It's divine spittle. I used to spit in front of my mom all the time, and she used to smack me for it. But I didn't care, I just spit. I'd be like, it's que asco, disgusting. You know? Que asco, right? And she'd be like, stop spitting. That's disgusting. That's gross. And I would just spit and spit and spit because I was cool. You know, I was a cool middle schooler. Everywhere, just spitting. You know, I was like, you got to stop spitting out of your mouth. Spit is gross. Has anybody spat on you before? No. You haven't lived long enough. Spit is disgusting. And my mom kind of, started making me consider that spit was disgusting. And now when I spit around Kara, she's gotten used to it, but she was like, ew, disgusting. Why are you spitting? You kiss me with that mouth. That's disgusting. I'm like, it's the same thing that's in my mouth when I kiss you. Now it's just out in the air. But somehow it's disgusting when it touches the air. I don't know. But spit is disgusting. It's horrendous. It's ugly. It's not loved. It's gross. But Jesus chose to spit in front of all these people. And I did some research. You need a lot of spit to make mud. Like a nice cup of spit. Could you imagine drinking a cup of spit? Just Jesus was at least 5 minutes spitting. The blind man for 5 minutes is here, and Jesus go, divine spittle. And it's not any less unattractive, Jesus. A full cup of spit. And my research was proven correct. Because after about a minute, I said, I don't have any more spit. Maybe it is divine. I don't know. But he takes the spit, what's vile, what's disgusting, and he grabs the dirt. Jesus grabs the two most base materials he could get his hand on. Whatever was nearest to him. That's what he used. And the blind man knew what Jesus was doing. But he must have been so desperate. I've had moments where I was losing air in the desperation of getting a fresh breath of air. Man, what I would do to breathe in those moments where I had no oxygen. This was the moment where you've been so thirsty before that you drink anything to quench your thirst. This is the moment that he would do anything just to see the sunrise. Because all he could see was shades of yellow when the sun would rise. But it was still black. The desperation to allow Jesus to grab spit. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him. Wash in the pool of Siloam. See, what I'm convinced God is communicating to us is that he creates a beautiful thing out of our lives. That we need to stop waiting on better material to come to God. We need to stop waiting until we get better. We need to stop waiting until our past is fixed or our future is more hopeful. That we need to be desperate. And we need to recognize that at the end of the day, God will just use spit and dirt. Whatever is comprised of our surroundings to change our life. That with God, if we are spit and dirt, we become a mud. A beautiful material in which you could create a beautiful piece of work. That your tragedies and your trauma, the difficult things in your life, the things that humiliate you, God would go on the ground and use what he can, use what you've given him, use your life, the base material, and cover your eyes so you would see again. I could just imagine Jesus grabbing it, the spit in the dirt, and putting it in his eyes. And the blind man, in desperation, allowing Jesus to do that. See, I'm convinced that he could see the moment Jesus touched him. But the reason that he didn't know he stopped being blind is because the mess was in his eyes. And that's what God does with us. Because we're blinded by our blame, and we're blinded by our guilt, and we're blinded by our trauma, we're blinded by our hurt, we're blinded by our pain, our abandonment, we are blinded by the most hideous things in the world. God crafts that. He puts it in our face, and it takes on the intention. He puts the mess in our eyes so that we would know that once we go and clean, we would see again life as he's intended it. And he says, go wash. He didn't say, go be healed. He said, now that I've grabbed your mess and put it in your eyes, now you will see life. Now that you've allowed me to use the materials that surrounded you, now you will see life. Now you will see the sun. He goes into the pool, the place called scent. He washes it off, and he sees the world. A world that he dreamt of. See, the reason I know that he could kind of see through the mud is because he walked to the pool. And right now, some of you, you've already let God grab that dirt and that spit and put it in your eyes, but you're afraid to wear it, to be vulnerable. You're trying to hide it. And God is saying, no. Show the people the stuff that you've been going through. But go where I've sent you. And there, your trauma will become the gift. Your pain, what is hideous, what is broken, will become the story of God in your life. The blind man was able to see because he let God use his mess. So many of us have so many broken parts of our soul. So much bitterness, so much anger, so much frustration, so much resentment. Don't wait until you stop resenting to give your life to Jesus. You need to give all that you are now. Because we are blind. And Jesus wants to make us see again. Will you stand with me?